Today, we conduct a Cascadian Zen interview. What is the nature of the bioregion known as Cascadia? How is this insight expressed by the people who live, work, practice, and play here? Is there a connection between Zen practice, broadly construed, and the Cascadia bioregion? If so, what is an Indigenous perspective to the effort to foster one's own inner life? If you ask Wedlidi Speck, he might talk about Indigenous relational practice, a term used by some Indigenous people to describe a preferred way to live, work, and play in the world. It's rooted to place and predates bioregionalism by about 4,000 years. Wedlidi is an Aboriginal therapist, a member of the Namgis First Nation of Alert Bay. He is hereditary head chief of the Giksam clan of the Kwakiutl people, self-described as bicultural First Nations man caught in the web of contemporary times. Wedlidi is committed to helping the Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal community build relationships, safe communities, and cross-cultural tolerance. He's our guest today. Tetsusen, Jason Worth, and I want to thank you and welcome you, and we're grateful for your presence.
Yes, we're so grateful for your presence. Thank you for being with us. And at any point during the interview, if you want to tell stories, if appropriate, to make a point, that's also welcome. Or otherwise, you can just hold forth in your customary philosophical way. But either is welcome and cherishable. Paul?
I just wanted to say, we want this event to reflect the highest and best parts of ourselves. So would there be some sort of intention setting or invocation that you'd like to do that would accomplish that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul, and I'm glad to be sitting in circle with you both, Jason. And I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional territory of the Puntledge, Eekson, and Comox people, recognizing the ancestors Kwakiutl and Hiquitin, Eekson and Kaitmut, and also Sa'atlam and Sa'atla. And these are the ancestors of the tribes that occupy this territory, who took their costumes off to become human many, many thousands of years ago. And with their attributes and their radiance, they created a way of being in relationship to the world around us that invite us to show up in a really special way. Invite us to show up looking at us as being a part of a family and part of something that's very sacred. And so in starting this way and by calling in the ancestors, it really helps me to set my mind and my heart and my spirit in a good direction and a good way. It helps me to recognize that I'm part of something that's really great. And so I just by calling our ancestors in, it feels like I can begin to share in a really good way, in the way that they shared.
May it be so. And you probably know better than I do, but Jason and I both are on the ancestral homeland of the Duwamish and Muckleshoot and other coastal Salish tribes.
Cool. Nice to know that.
In fact, the creek that we both, the watershed created by this creek here was originally known as Tukwib. And it empties out into Lake Washington right here, about 1,000 feet from where I am. So we were very fortunate to come across that information that comes from research done about 90 or so years ago.
That's great. Yes, relationships are so important. They most certainly really inform us and how we are to navigate. Yeah.
Well, with Liddy, we'll be talking today a little bit about what's now called bioregionalism. And when we talk about something like that, we're talking first and foremost about place, a place for humans, but not just stuff lying about us, but our relationships with each other, with our non-human relatives, plants, animals, earth, history. Can you tell us a little bit about your relationship to your own ancestral homeland? Can you describe the place from which you speak now?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's really beautiful when I opened up by acknowledging the Puntledge, Aixen, and Comox peoples, is that my ancestry comes from all of those ancestors. And so when I speak to you about Quayamen and Hiquitin, they came down from above and took their costumes off to become human. And when they did, they began to walk in a way on this land in a very gentle way. Uh, um, and so in that gentle way that they walked was to know that they were a part of a very significant family. And so what I've come to learn, and I've had to follow certain rituals to do this. I took a 4-year commitment to bathe in a glacial fed river. And then I did another 4 years because the first four didn't help. It took that long. But in that strengthening of spirit and aligning with spirit, I began to understand the significance of the river and the healing that comes from being in relationship to it in a sacred way. But more so that what was in the river taught me about human consciousness, and that the river is a symbol for that. And so as we begin to look at all of life and acknowledge all of life, we realize that it is about how we hold perspectives, and those perspectives feed the direction that we go. You know, really beautiful thing. And so when I think about how I am with the land, etched in the stories of the people are the orders of our creation. And there was a life before us, and we need to pay attention to that life before us. And it's we talk about the creator having a dream, and in the dream there was a beauty. And upon waking from the dream, the beauty was initiated and manifest. And so it was believed that the first order of creation was the creation of a family. And that's why our people say that it's Mother Earth and Father Sky, Grandfather Sun, Grandmother Moon. The stars are the uncles and the clouds are the aunties. And each have an attribute, each have a gift that when they work together, they create the beauty of that dream. And it's magic, you know. And so and out of that came, we'll say, the second order of creation, which was the coming of plant peoples. And our people say that the first plant to grow in this territory was the cedar tree, and it's referred to as the tree of life for our people. And it holds a special place in how we relate to it. My father taught me how to walk around the sacred cedar tree and pray. And in the pray is to recognize that the tree is giving of itself so that we may be well. And so the reason we go through 4 times is to make sure that our spirit, our intention, and our way of our being is in alignment with the spirit of the tree. And then when we follow the tree, we ask that tree to let us take its clothing, let us take its very being, and for its spirit to become part of what we're wearing, and a part of what we're paddling in, and a part of what we're living in. So if they become house beams, or whether it's canoe, whether it's our hats or our clothing, the essence of that tree is with us. The spirit, life force of that tree is with us. And so when you walk in that way, it really it gives life and breath to something that's greater than what we know, right? And so the third order of creation was the emergence, we'll say, of 4 worlds: the heaven, air, land, and sea. And the houses that were occupied those spaces were thunderbird, eagle, raven, you know, grizzly bear, wolf, and deer, and killer whale, and you know, all these supernatural beings occupied the spaces. And there were 4 rivers that allowed each of them to experience each other's village. And in order for the myth people of our territory here to go to visit the Thunderbird, we had to borrow the masks of the salmon. And when we put those masks on, we could see the river and travel that river to be able to go above it to visit them. And so we really pay attention to the meaning of that, you know, and the relationship to it. And then finally, we'll say the chief of all the myth people in this territory was Raven, who took a costume off and to become human. And when he took the costume off, he modeled to every one of the myth people that it was time for them to move into human existence, and to build houses, to put their crest on it, and begin to relate to the world in a very special way, and to always look backwards to the orders of creation to find their medicine and their strength from it. There's a word in our language, what they call it, Tlawaya Sinskayolas. Tlawaya Sinskayolas. And what that means is it's strength from your ancestry that travels with us. And that's a beautiful thing, you know, because it's the strength comes from our knowing, the strength comes from our sensing, our strength comes from our doing, right? And so when we are complete in that way, we know we're walking carefully on the land. And so when you asked that question, I had to go back to the story of our orders of creation for me to draw my meaning and my description of that, you know. And so if I'm opening in ceremony that way, then when I'm acknowledging the territory or acknowledging the ancestry or acknowledging the story or the orders of creation, then we can begin to do things in a good way, you know. The really important way of being too is around this beautiful elder. She was 86 years old, sitting with me over a cup of tea, and she taught me this word called awitnakula, awitnakula, and that means to be one with heaven, the air, the land, and the sea, and everything in it. And so if you aspire to be in a Zen relationship with Cascadia, you know, it's like that. It's like you want to be in relationship to the world around you. And which means that as the world around you changes, is to be adaptive in it and responsive in it, right? And so there's winter, there's spring, there's summer, there's fall. Each has a calling. Each has a relationship to offer you. Each has a deepening of wisdom that we step into and learn from. You know, it's a really powerful thing. So that's a kind of a long way to answer your question.
No, that's fine. What you're saying is
That was beautiful. Wow, that
really
was so beautiful. It brought tears to my eyes. Thank you.
and
Oh,
likewise me. We're on the home ground in that state that you just mentioned. We're on the home ground of every living thing, and everything is alive. But we're
Yeah.
also on their home ground. We see their home ground. We're on their home ground as well as our own home ground.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
You have an essay, Relational Practice, and you say in that essay that place is, quote, a marshalling point to anchor perspectives and notions about the world, the universe, God, life, death, children, harvesting food, plants, and doing ceremony. And one such ceremony is Namatla. Can you tell us
Mhm.
about this?
Yes, yes, the Namatla, have oneness on your face. And what's beautiful about that is that you know, when I call in the ancestors, it's really asking to help me to open the doorway to place, right? Opening to that I can put this and recognize it in my mind, in my heart, in my belly, and that the ways of thinking, ways of sensing will be clear. And so Namatla addresses the part of the experience which does what relates to your mind. And so it's like put oneness, put that cultural perspective on your mind. And so Namatla is a way of doing things. This elder, the late James Seaweed, was a hereditary chief, and he taught me about how my great grandfather would walk through his village singing a song. And this song was a beautiful song, and it just says, "Hey Tlanuma, hey Tlanuma, hey Halisila Utlalasens, Gayan Samya Halatzodziam, hey Tlanuma, Zilquanuma, hey Halisila Utlalasens, Gayan Samya Halatzodziam, hey Tlanuma." And he would sing that over and over and over as he went through the village, walking back and forth, back and forth. And then soon people would come out of their houses and they would join him and they would sing that song with him. And before you knew it, that song just echoed throughout the whole village and the land. And what he was singing was about how it is to give honor to our creation, to our creator, to the life force, and how that brings warmth to our heart and to our minds and to our spirit. And when you're in that, working toward the being in that alignment, the people who are with you and share your song know or say that the conversation that's going to happen is about that larger perspective, is about that big picture relationship. And so then they would go into his house and they would be seated, they would be given food, and then they would talk, right? And so the idea that what I learned from that about Namatla is that having one with your community is really important. Being one with a community that you can share your song and they own that song with you is a really powerful experience. So it's a shared thing, right? And then we'll say to be able to know that as we talk about things that we're placing at the center of our conversation, creation, and that when we bring them together, then we know, say that whatever we come up with will be wise, will be meaningful, and it will reflect, we'll say, our understanding of our greater knowledge of being one with all living things. And it's a beautiful thing. So with Namatha, in that way, which speaks to having oneness on your face, is really about saying that I'm waking up that oneness in my very being. And then it connects to the oneness of your heart, and then you're taking it in, and it's becoming a part of your belly. And so that conversation and that food nurtures and goes into the very essence, every cell in your body. They had some pretty incredible ways of doing things in the past. It's a beautiful one.
Thank you. I reflect sometimes on the very powerful and resilient canoe family ceremonies that have come back. And of course, those families would not ancestrally have recognized anything like the Canadian-US border. Certainly on the US side, that border has become more and more brutal. And this side of the border has been extraordinarily divisive. Yet you say, the song made sure the whole world was included. So how do you respond to the immense, heartbreaking, violent divisiveness of our time?
My sense of that, Jason, is really we are not thinking with oneness on our face or in our heart or in our belly. And we have a tendency, we'll say, to carve our way of being into left brain, right brain, reptilian brain, and so we're either working from a place that's very logical, working from a place out of survival, and those kind of ways of being in the world are really siloed and disconnected. And so a part of this is that we need people, we'll say, who will emerge to sing that song in our communities, to be trustworthy, consistent, and people can depend on, because they know they don't change depending on who they sit with, right? That we are really committed to Creator, we're really committed to creation, and we're really committed to the larger idea that we are a human family. And when we sit together, we're a part of this concept, what I call Namima, people of one kind. And so if we're thinking about Cascadia, we're thinking about a borderless idea that it is about, we're say, relationships to air, land, sea, and people, right? And so it just requires, I think, starting with our young, is beginning to invite our young to see the world the way it was intended to be seen, and nurturing them and helping them to learn to trust themselves, and they can grow up and they can be models of this way of being.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah. Are there any other notions from your tradition that you see parallels with Zen practice, where Zen might be a different way of saying what your people have believed in this part of the world for thousands of years?
Yeah, Paul, I think about the notion of right thought and right action. It's like it's the idea that when we think about ceremony, our dream or our aspiration is to live a world of oneness. My great grandmother would sit up first thing in the morning and she would pray to the Creator to celebrate relationship, to be in relationship, and and to do so in a real humble way, right? And it doesn't mean like it has to be a dogmatic type prayer. It's really about it's a way of saying that I want to be in relationship to my higher self. I want to have heaven in my mind, in my heart, in my belly, and I want to be able to live my life throughout the day in that way. And so right thought is really important, and then right action is equally important. And that is how do we translate that in a way that we can, when we gather people, that we're really hosting them in an honorable way, that we're recognizing like the namaste, right? The idea that people's beauty, their their creation self has been recognized, and that that they're safe with us. And so the really important tradition that we have to help with that is that we select winter as a time to come in to do our work. And winter is different than spring, summer, and fall. Spring is considered to be the time in which birth happens, new life, new buds. Summer is where there's maturity, where berries now are ripened and ready to be harvested. Salmon are at their peak of their offering. And a lot of things in summer represent, we'll say, that maturity. In the fall, it's time for us to recognize that the world is coming to an end as we know it. Leaves drop off the trees, salmon spawn and die, bears have fattened up and going to sleep. There's lots of indicators that this changing world of ours and its very nature of its transitional way is an incredible teaching tool for us around the human spirit and self. And then we'll say when we come to winter, it's a time between death and birth. It's that place in which we call it a winter solstice, but it's where the masculine and feminine dance to germinate a new life, right? And so we see the birth of that in spring. And so what we do is we fill it with ceremony. We fill that time with ceremony. It's that time where this energy, this life force comes, where we can rejuvenate ourselves and we can give new experience and new breath and new life to who we are as a people, as a community, and as a nation, right? And so when we align ourselves to that, things work really good for us, and then we go to spring, summer, and fall, right? And so a part of that. That kind of humility, I think, is very much found in Zen practice. It's a way of looking at life as in its delicacy and its beauty and its transition, right? And so when I look at that, I see that as being a really powerful way of just knowing that life is very much like a kaleidoscope, and we're very much like the person who moves that kaleidoscope, and very much is a part of the experience of whoever moves it. It's like so I am the architect and I am the captain. I am the author. I am the paper and I am the pen, and and I am the story, right? And so when we can conceptualize that, then we realize that I am one with everything. I am everything.
I am, when you were talking about the different seasons and you were in berry season, it occurred to me across my screen in the last couple of weeks that they found that salal berries have 10 times the nutritional power of the next closest berry, the blueberry. So that's probably something that you are aware of and your people have known. And it was interesting for me to find that out.
Yeah, it's a beautiful berry, and it was used a lot in our meals. But the interesting part is that it's such a vigorous medicine being that when you want to work with negative energy, because there is energies, right? Life is energies, and so you take the bushes part of it, and you wrap red cloth in it, and you can sweep houses with that to realign the energy of the space. And and it's like, as human beings, we have a tendency, we'll say, to want to hold on to things. If we're not in ceremony, we hold on to things, and so that energy will stick and be around, and so we can clean it out that way,
Mm.
and we can move it, and it becomes free again. Yeah, good space. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, there's a story my aunt told me about this cave that she went into, and she brought these slough bushes, and there was inside the cave. She hit the wall of the cave, and what turned up was it illuminated a painting on the wall of the cave, and it was meaningful for her. And so when I asked her, is that if I would see the same thing, and she said to me that whatever would be illuminated is for what you needed. It's a gift for each of us, right? And I thought that was really profound.
I think so too. That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Your comments also remind me that in Zen, no one thinks of ourselves growing or doing things all by ourselves, because to be a self is to be in relation with all other selves.
Yeah.
So it's really a dependent co-origination is the way that sometimes one of the Buddha's most precious words is translated, paticca samuppada, becoming through one's relations. And I think in another sense too, everybody was once upon a time indigenous, but some people have got very far away from that, very alienated from that heritage and very much lost touch of it. And in your writing, you speak of the unseen world. How would you describe that to all the people who've forgotten their own indigenous roots?
Yes. And so what's important is to know, say, that there was a myth world before our world, and it comes with just believing, like the stories, and the important story for us was Born to be the Sun, Lisa Lagilev. And Born to be the Sun, the mother married the sun and gave birth to this child, and they named it after the sun, Born to be the Sun, that someday that the child would take over the father. And so in this case, the child the story describes the child learning what it needs to learn in the community, and eventually arriving at an age where he shot arrows into the sky and made a rope so he could climb up to visit his father, and which he did. And in that experience, he's able to carry the sun, and through that, know how to illumine the world both with light and color, and returns to become a great chief in our world. And so the idea of that, it tells us about there's a world that is below and a world that is above, as there's a world in and there's a world out. And so when we build a rope, we can transcend those worlds. We can go from literal to symbolic. And that when we know that we have a Father above, and when we really embrace that, we have a thing called faith. And the idea, we this belief acknowledges, will say that there is something on the other side. When our people say that when we die we go home, it speaks to the idea that as myth people, we took our costumes off to come here, and then when we die we go back to the place in which we originated. And it's a really beautiful concept. And so when people are wondering about that, I invite them to think about the place in which they're standing, the place in which they're experiencing the story. And so if they're experiencing the story in left brain, it's going to be very limiting. It's going to be literal, it's going to be concrete, and they're going to look for a logical explanation, right? And so when we think about kaleidoscope, if we say, look, I just want you to come over and look at our symbolic world, like put this on your face, and let's begin to explore, we'll say, what the metaphors are for shooting those arrows in the sky, making the rope and climbing above, and the idea of putting, we'll say, the mask on and bringing illumination to the world, both in light and color. And about, we'll say, when you return to Earth, how that brings life and breath to things. And so, we've got other stories that Egyptian stories, or we've got Christian stories that talk about Christ going to the desert and coming back, right? There's all these places where we go to another dimension and we come back. And with that, we have illumination. And so it helps people realize that when we do the work, we will find what we need in order to bring light, love, and color to the world. So in the origin story, it talks about grandfather son, and if we ever wanted to know what a role of a grandfather is, I just say sit with the son for a while, right? And what you find, we'll say, is that relationship with the son is that we get very comfortable, and we feel we can just snuggle into the warmth, and our imagination it goes free, and it provides a lot of great illumination. And so, so the role of a grandfather, being in relationship to grandchildren, is about, cultural safety, about they can nestle into the story. You provide them with warmth and imagination, and allow them to grow that way. And so, that's in opposition to stories that we see today that have no context. We've got daily television, where it's Days of Our Lives, where they hurt each other, they manipulate each other, they shame each other, or we'll say the level of violence that is perpetuated. If we take a look at space aliens, we create fear that someone that's outside our community is a bad person, and all of these stories of the hero's journey are not about finding illumination. It's about destroying, right, and vanquishing. And so it's a bit about bringing awareness to what are the stories we want our children to live, right? And I think those are really important. And so sometimes we'll say, as teachers and as healers and as leaders, we need to model that. We need to be able to say that, I got some stories here for you, and these are different stories that you grew up with, right? And so we can help them make those shifts that they need to make, and realize that now you have choice. Do you choose Born to Be the Sun, or you choose Days of Our Lives? But you have choice. So only then with choice do you become an architect of your own future, right?
Wow.
If you only think one way, we don't, right? It's like the Buddha who says, don't listen to me, right?
Yeah.
But that's what, to me, and my understanding of all this says, it's a bit about, we'll say, that now I really can think this out, and this is my choice. So my karma is in relationship to the choice I've made.
Beautiful. Amen to that.
This inability to understand metaphor reminds me of a beautiful poem by a poet who died just a couple of months ago, Diane de Prima. Her poem is called Rant, and the refrain in the poem is, "The only war that matters is the war against the imagination. All other wars are subsumed in it." And I realize how prophetic that was when I think about the phrase Black Lives Matter, which is essentially a very short poem. And people in this country have such difficulty understanding we're not saying only Black Lives Matter. We're saying that this culture has shown that Black lives don't matter. So we are asserting the opposite of that. Not only that Black Lives Matter, but that's just the baseline, that it goes from there, that this Black lives are what made this country great, such incredible contributions, and we can go on and on. So the inability to understand a phrase this simple shows you how atrophied the imagination has become. And in your writing, you have an antidote to that that you refer to as a brain gym.
Yes.
Talk to us about the brain gym. It might be the imagination gym as well, but tell
Yes.
us about what you had in mind when you coined that.
Yes, and I think that you say that very well. Thank you. And when I'm looking at brain gym, you know, I look at the power of left brain, the power of logic, hierarchy, right? And for those who don't understand that, it's a part of the neocortex or left hemisphere that organizes thought, right? It's what gives meaning and shape to things, and it's very systematic, very analytical, very logical. It's very concrete, and that's a really important thing to have. On the other side of the hemisphere is the part that oftentimes the artistic, the symbolic, the metaphorical reside. And when they work together, we write great books, and we create great music, and we do great dance, or we do things in a really neat way. And so when what happens is that as a result of colonization, as a result of racism and violence, we have drawn on a part of our brain, which is the first most fundamental part of our brain, called the reptilian brain. And so that brain, will say, historically was the only thing we had, and it allowed us to have sensing, and it's that whole notion of fight, flight, flight, you know, sex, food, reproduction, all these things. And what we did is that we navigated a world in that state, you know, and did quite well. But the diet, and they say with seafood and things like this, that the brain began to develop over the millions of years, and we developed this neocortex, and it enveloped the old brain. So the triune brain model, which suggests, will say that you know, that we had unlimited capacity for knowledge and wisdom and ability. And so for those who say who are really logical, you know, I feel will say that they're only part of the story. And what we, if we are able to bring balance to it, and we able to say to know what's being called for, then we have resource in front of us and our ability to respond to what's being needed right now. And what's being needed in the world right now is some connection, say, to our reptilian brain, but also our right brain. And so that what we're doing is we're doing our healing that we need to. So when people are hearing things, we got to ask, from where are they hearing it, right? And so when we look at the Black Lives Matter, and you feel that you're being left out of the equation, what does that say? It says that you're in left brain, and in your left brain will say that it's duality, right? It's hierarchical, and so you're responding from that place. And then what happens if you're being left out and you feel insecure about it? You feel threatened, and so you go to the reptilian brain and develop a strategy that oftentimes is quite violent, you know, and you feel with, say, that you're going to disappear, or your way of life disappears, and so you do what you need to do to protect it. And so those parts of the brain work together. And so if we were able to invite people in to look at right brain that can encompass, we'll say, and work with another way of seeing this, it creates dissidence in where you're working from. And so, but that requires us to practice, right? It requires us to move and to respond. And I find, we'll say, that a simple question can really help to do that. And that simple question is there another way of seeing this? You know? And so let's invite people into a pathway of curiosity as opposed to a pathway of judgment. If people are being judgmental, it's very closed, and it's positional. And if you ask the question about what alternatives are, what is another way of seeing this, what's being called for right now, it opens that door of curiosity, of possibility, of opportunity. And so we become like the architects of the journey then. Right now, it's like you're not. You're stuck to a story that probably is not your story.
Wow, that's beautiful. You know, this side of a border that we don't even recognize, I would say it's time to send the Republican Party to the brain gym. But anyway,
because they've been channeling their inner lizard, and it's time it
yeah.
stopped.
Yes, exactly. Yes, yes,
But I
and
also, please.
yeah, and the part of it, I think, when we think about symbols, rituals, and ceremony, like the one thing is, that we all strive for a crest. We all want to know where we come from. Yakantlali's was the whale that traveled the universe, the world. And so one day it went up on a beach and took its costume off, and sent it lovingly back to the ocean. And he said, from this day forward, my name will be Klalis, stranded whale, and my land will be called Klalali, place of whales. And then he built a house and he put the whale on his house. And in that very act, in his generosity, he said that this will be me as a human being. My civilization starts here, and this will be the place of my descendants. And so to know, say, where we come from, the myth world, we put the whale on the house. So that we always got connection to our past, connection to our present, and we know how to move forward, right? And I think when we do that, it's a form of connection. But when our nationalism is based on an idea of a flag, on the idea of defense, an idea of survival, as an idea, we'll say, of vanquishing, an idea of violence, then it's the core of what we are. And so if we're able to reframe that to say, who are we as Americans, or who are we as our human beings? And and then how do we redefine ourselves in a way that is built on us being together as a human family? It's a really different perspective. And so so when we come to grips with that, what we're doing in BC right now, the Human Rights Commissioner, Kasari Govender, she is got a team together, and they have billboards, and the billboards simply say, "Am I a racist?"
Mm.
Right? So when you're looking at this and asking this question, "Am I a racist?" What it does is that what would it be like if we had billboards to say, am I a human being? Are we a human family? Are we one people, one planet? You imagine the impact of that question?
Um,
It's beautiful,
yeah.
and it begins to say that at what place of our consciousness are we working from? And I think I might have told you this story, but this beautiful man named Ken Bloomfield. I was sitting in a restaurant having a cup of tea one day, and he said, "Hey, Wedlidi," he says, "you don't know me, but I know you." He said, "Come sit with me." And he said, "When were you born?" And I said, "I was born in January 30th. And he said, "Oh, you're an Aquarian." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You're a water bearer." And I said, "Yeah, I know that much." And then he says, "Well, he said, water, he said, is electricity." He said, "Electricity is consciousness." And he said, "Electricity is 110, 220, 440, and then the unlimited source of life force." And he said, so human beings who are in the world, he said, there's several of them who are 110. There's many of them are 220. There's many of them 440, and there's many of them that are the masters, right? And the Buddhas, the Christs, and things like that. And he said, but the interesting part, my friend, for you, I want to give you some advice. When you're working with, say, with people who are 110, and you're in your 440 place, tell them stories. He said that helps them to understand what you're trying to communicate. He says, because they will not understand you. you know, and I think that's what that teaching that day was so profound, because it's like, 110 is like, put the toaster down, man, and eat your toast. It's Don Coyote, yeah. you know,
I'm
and
glad,
then there's
I'm glad the phrase dim bulb didn't come up.
yeah, and that's the part, and I think that when we're looking at answers, I find that there's stories. and we need to go back to them to help in their learnings, and you know, and really come to celebrate metaphors. And people don't realize they already do that, you know, by the very fact that they've attached and put a flag outside every house. It's a metaphor. And so if we can build on the metaphor and invite them into a different place, and I think we already have a head start, right?
Do you think that's what Cascadia does? I mean, Jason and I, inspired by Gary Snyder and Peter Berg and others who envisioned a different way of being in the world, one whose allegiance is to place, to this creek I was talking about, to this beautiful lake that I look at it every day. So do you think that the notion of Cascadia is a small step at beginning to do that, reorient people to place before nation and all the jingoism that you described that goes with it?
Absolutely. You know, and just so you know, what's interesting is our premier right now is talking about rail lines and relationships using Cascadia as a model. And I think that's catching, right? And I think when we look at it, is that the only way that we can have impact and influence in a loving way is to look at how the watershed works, you know, the relationships, and whole thing about hydrology, right? You know, and if we spend time with global hydrology, it's just so much wisdom that comes from that. If we look at, let's say, watershed management, watershed relationship, it just makes sense, you know. And so Cascadia is a way of coming back to the origins of a footprint or a fingerprint that the ancestors made work, right? And they did it in a beautiful way. And I do want to just speak to the notion of consciousness, because there's a point where when we move past 110 thinking, that we begin to see the human family. And when we see the human family, we see that we were all indigenous people at one time, and a lot of people are connected to that indigeneity in the way that they live, you know. And so when I think of your work in Cascadia, I think of it that way. It's that connection to the original design philosophy, and you know, beautiful place.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yeah, you know, my question now is to you as a fellow Aquarian. So I learned today that our birthday is 4 days apart. So we're both water
Awesome.
bearers.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, if you look at the west coast of Turtle Island, it's in general really quite dry. Mexico is a very dry part of the world. California is Mediterranean, but Cascadia is water central.
Mhm.
Our great rivers, the Salish Sea, glaciers, certainly from the Seattle area up north, this is all glaciation, the land, very landscape. Water is everywhere. And you've mentioned water a few times, but what is water to we Cascadians? What is water to you?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I love the concept of water. I come from water. My great, 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 great grandfather, and the name has come down for many, many generations, but his name is Wanuk. And
Mm,
Wa in our language is water. Wanuk means people of the water, and they come of
mm,
the water. And so we have a lot of names. My grandfather, his name was Wadsi, which means he's like a big river. And we have Wagila. My brother has a name Wagila. He got that as a child, the making of a river, you know.
mm,
And all of these names that pertain to Wamish, you know, that it's a good river, you know, things like
mm,
that. Eh? And so there's people, let's say, whose life is about communicating water. We also have people like my daughter, my late daughter was called Kekala, Kekalaga, which means that she brings lots of light and fire to the house. You know,
mm,
so there's Tlikwap, which is the name of a chief who he's the stone that's in the fire that cooks the food.
mm,
And so there's lots of uh, cultural agility that describes, we'll say, the elements that people have a responsibility to make sure that they use their agility,
mm,
and that they're connecting water to fire to cooking to, you know, it's about
mm.
relationship, right? And
Beautiful.
it's really fascinating. When I think about some of the stories here in the community that I live, they talk about a time where there was fire, and so the water dried up, and the people had to go a long way to get their food, but they didn't move. They went a long way to get their food, and they brought it home. Then we'll say there was a flood. You know, there was lots of water that purified the world, and then after that there was a glaciation. You know, and so we were in the fourth stage of life now, and so you know, so it's interesting because when we're looking at these stories, they're talking about the elements as well, and so it's worth paying attention to. Jeffrey Goodman talked about in his book American Genesis about was he focused a lot on the Hopi and San Francisco peaks, and his framing of things and timelines are really interesting because he talked about a period of fire, a period of water, and a period of ice, right? And I found that really interesting that his idea of those and the story that I have here were really similar, you know. You know, and so
It's interesting that you talked about the flood not as a devastating event, but as a purification, which is very interesting. You see people responding in a similar way to this pandemic on what a horrible year 2020 has been because of the pandemic and how things have gone missing. But one can also see it as a purification. Not to say that that's an easy thing, but
yeah,
it's interesting the language that you use, which reminds me of the very time we live in. Another thing you're talking reminds me of is my teacher, Beaver Chief, a late Lummi Indian doctor. And I was reminded of the cedar tree song that he sang and taught us. Cedar tree, clap your hands and dance with me. And he said that settlers and the descendants of settlers come to this part of the world, they think for a job or a relationship, but in truth, they're coming here for spiritual reasons because this place is known throughout the continent as a place with very strong medicine and Indian doctoring and that kind of thing. Is that something that you understand to be true?
Yeah, understand will say that there's been through history a number of times that the transformer has come, and the transformer has done some really amazing things. And there's 27 things that were done for the Kwakiutl. But according to one of my teachers, the one that taught me about a Witnagilla, she said that he came different times. It wasn't just once. And so I'm just sort of learning about that right now. And so there were periods where things were transformed and there was great change. And so, but with it came great invention too, and insight. And so I'm also spending time with that idea. But I think that when we're looking at catastrophe, we are the survivors, you know, and if we look at things, it's because we listened, and it's because we've drawn on our wisdom to do this. Most of the stories they talk about will say those who survived were those who listened, and I think that's really important because in whatever they experience is an inherent wisdom, about the old way and way of connecting. And right now, I will say that there was the story of the transformer who came, and there were some really beautiful elders that the transformer turned into stone. And so it's kind of confusing because if you take it literally, you're thinking that these people were turned into stone. But when you take it symbolically, I interpret it as being a time in which the transformer taught us how to write in rock and how to use that as a storytelling stone, a teaching stone. And so the ancestor who was a really good ancestor, that story is inherent in that carved stone, the petroglyph. And so it makes more sense to me. So that's when I talk about Kwayamen, who was in the stone, and other people who were turned to stone. What are the attributes that we need to pay attention to, right? And it's really beautiful. One of the things that my father's family, their ancestor was called Old Man, and the old man went to the top of a mountain called Samas, and he sang and he prayed, and it was the time of the flood, and so a butterfly as large as an eagle flew over and it landed on his head, and they had this communication about his future, and when that was finished, the water started to recede, and as the water was receding, he was walking down with it, and he began to live his life with particular values that he would be known for throughout his life: his wisdom and his generosity, his kindness, his invention, right? And so that's what came from the flood for us, and so it was like the receding water made visible that grandeur, that dedication, that faith, that principled way of being in the world. And so it was a lovely man, very generous. So when we think about, when we have a feast or a potlatch and we show the mask with the butterfly on the head, we tell that story, and we tell about what was revealed to us, and that's what we have to hang on to, and never than any other time do we need that now. It's important.
Wow, that's beautiful. I feel very fully awake from your teaching today. Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. My last question is kind of a very open question. What advice would you give someone interested in what we're calling Cascadian Zen? And I'll say this about Cascadian Zen. The name itself doesn't own the concept. It was already a very ancient concept before the Buddha was even born 2,500 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a poetic gesture, much along the ways that your stories are gestures, trying to get us to open up to something that no one name can own. But if someone's interested in going to that place, going to that mind world, what advice do you have them for rooting into place and opening up one's own inner spirit world?
Yeah, I would say that listen to the call. Listen to the call, and that in our life we're called to do something, and we hear a roaring sound in our heart and our belly and our ears, right? Go toward the direction of that, and you're going to be walking with people who will teach you about things, and sometimes they'll talk to you about the river, about water, and find yourself, look at the river, look in the river and see your reflection. And to know will say that it teaches you, will say that you are part of, then you find your reflection in the tree and in the stone and in the air and the clouds, and you find yourself in all of these things. And then we'll say, when you look back at who you think you are in your community and your family, you will know, we'll say, that that's all an illusion, and that there's something greater you must find. And so you need to walk on the land. You need to journey the land. You need to know, we'll say, who is there, been there before you, and what have they learned about their walk. And so when we talk about Buddha, that person's walked on the land. When we talk about Christ, he's walked on the land. When we look at all the different people who have walked on the land, we take what they have taught, and we walk with that. And how does that grow us, right? And then we'll say we go to a certain point, we'll say, where things will be confusing for us, and we hit our wall, right? And when we hit our wall, we must have the courage and the fortitude, we'll say, to take that I and let that I go, or that way of seeing go, in order for us to see the world differently. And for instance, if you have fear, if you don't let the eye of fear go, you'll never find courage. If you're attached to possessions, if you never let that go, you'll never be free to journey to places that don't require that, right? And so as you journey that, you're going to find, we'll say, in the event that you might need to let both eyes go, and you might be able to learn how to sense and deeply. And as you do that, you learn how to sit alone. And as you sit alone, all the things that who have made you who you are, either going to help you grow or they're going to be a hindrance. And then you start letting those things go that aren't helpful. And then what's left is you. And what's left is potential. What's left is opportunity. What left is what's possible, right? And then we'll say you jump, you take the opportunity to go beyond whatever limit that you set for yourself. And if it's an eagle, a raven, or whatever it might be, soar above that and journey this world in a way that allows you to see it in its totality and its completeness. And then you've arrived at your utmost humility, right? And so if people know that that to step into Cascadia, to step into teachings, is that it's a journey, and allow yourself to take the journey, trust yourself in the journey, and trust the teachers. Even if they seem to own the truth, trust the teachers, right? If the person says that I've been to that river, I've jumped, I've seen things, this is my truth, well, that's his truth. Trust it. That's his truth. It doesn't mean that it's your truth. So, that's what I mean about like giving up the I. If you think you have to be like them, then you're going to be like them. Like be truthful to your journey. And when you take that journey, it's a beautiful journey. And so that's my recommendation to people is that it's a journey that's really worth taking. It's an amazing journey. And it's like, sure, it's fearful at times, and sure that it's you grieve what you're giving up at times, but I tell you, it's amazing, right? It's like when I've sat alone, let's say in the wilderness, I've had to come to grips with parts of my own shame that I've carried for years because of colonization, right? And so as a result of that, when I let that go and learn that it's not mine, that I've recruited it, or I've been recruited. There's lots of ways to look at things like that. And when you begin to do the release work that you need to, is you need to remember, we'll say that whatever memory you have is simply energy. And if it's a memory you don't want, move the damn energy. And let that energy go with the river. Let that energy go with the wind. Let the sun take it away. However you choose to do that. But it's about, we'll say, being free to that. And when you let that go, something else comes in. It's like, for instance, a jealous person who fears loss and tries to hang on to their partner. When they let go of the fear, what fills that place is love. And love of self. And we always say that when you let go of something you think you own, you learn about yourself, and you learn about the experience that you're having, and a new concept of ownership, the ownership of experience, right? And that journey of your partner, your wife, your friend, or whatever it is, it's their journey. It's not your journey. Yeah, it's a really, really wonderful experiences like that.
That's incredibly beautiful. In my tradition, the great Zen master Dogen said, when you sit, you pluck out the Buddha's eye and make it your own.
Yeah,
So it's the same,
that's
the
awesome.
same image.
Yeah.
And yeah, you gave our book a major upgrade today. This was very powerful.
Nice.
What can I say? I mean, I'm just in awe of being able to have this kind of experience. It's such a gift to be able to talk to you like this, to be able to document this in such a way, to be able to have access to this kind of material is not something that happens every day. And I'm so grateful to be able to sit here and to have you talk so deeply and directly to us from your very beautiful tradition. And it's, God, how beautiful life is to be able to have this kind of experience and this kind of technology that allows us to connect with you 700 miles away or whatever it is, so hugely grateful. And we're probably going to need you to help us with a glossary so that we get things spelled correctly. That is one thought that occurred to me.
Exactly.
And I'm going to just do some brief editing and put this online so that you'll have access and that you can begin to realize the terms that we're going to need for this, and that
Sure.
we can send it to a professional transcription service and have them do a first draft transcription, which Jason and I will then edit and then present to you so that you may be able to clarify some things and make it look as good as possible. So
Perfect. Look forward to it.
That was really awesome. I just feel just deep, deep gratitude.
There you go, man.
I'm grateful to Adelia for connecting us. That was a really
Yes.
good thing.
Yes, I'm glad too. This has been great. It's
right,
not such a lonely place after all.
No, only the ego can be lonely, right?
Exactly.
All right. Much
Awesome.
love, my brother. We'll be in touch.
Okay, take care, my friends.
Thank you, thank
Yeah.
you, thank you.
Yep.